Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kopi Sikwaila, and I'll be facilitating our session this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join us. You will have an opportunity to make your input during the workshop once our guest presenter has gone through her presentation. Now, her presentation has two components. There's a first section, and we'll take Q&As and input after that section, and then another section follows, and then a Q&A and inputs will be taken after that session as well. You can type your questions or input as we go along in the Q&A section, which is on your screen, or you can raise your hand to speak by clicking on the speak icon, which is also on your screen. Please note that the Q&A is strictly for those who have questions or have input that they want to make. The presentation will be distributed at the end of the webinar. It will be available on the Files tab, which you can also find on your screen. I'm joined by my colleague, Monde Ndlovu, who heads the Advocacy and Thought Leadership Department at the BMF, Ayavuya Madolo and Sipe Zenani, who will be summarizing the discussion for us today. Sipe is the Student Chapter Chair in the provinces, and Ayavuya and our guest speaker are part of the Free State Provinces Interim Committee. Now, the draft Public Procurement Bill attempts to address the weaknesses in procurement legislation that make it easy for corrupt government officials, politicians, and service providers to loot the state when tenders are issued. And at the same time, what it's doing is it's opening up procurement opportunities to Black-owned and women-controlled suppliers. The bill prohibits government employees from trading with the state, and the drafters of the bill aim to close loopholes that are created by the fragmentation in laws governing public sector procurement. The bill aims to develop a single legislation that eliminates fragmentation. And currently, procurement is legislated through the Public Finance Management Act, which is applicable to national and provincial governments, while municipalities are regulated through the Municipal Finance Management Act. So the bill is essential for South Africa's continued quest for transformation into a society that is free of racism and sexism, of the colonial and apartheid political economy. So the purpose of this discussion today is to consolidate your input into our submission that the BMF is going to be making to the National Treasury on the Public Procurement Bill draft. And this workshop will be one of many coordinated by the BMF's Advocacy and Thought Leadership Department, which we will be using to get you, our members, to contribute to the policymaking process. We want to hear your views on policy development so we can take such robust engagements forward to influence policy related to your development as managers, as entrepreneurs, as young professionals, and as students. So this is a process that is critical to the work of lawmaking, and you are invited to be a part of this process, not only in the session today, but in other sessions on policy developments that are to come. Our guest presenter today is Nonku Hlongwa. I'm just seeing if Nonku has joined us already. Okay. Nonku is a born entrepreneur, an advocate for social justice, human rights, and climate change. She has the ability to rekindle confidence and inspire those that come across her to live to the highest purpose and save the world. An outstanding social professional who has extensive experience in multi-sectors and policy planning initiatives. She has the ability to facilitate partnership between public and private sectors in advocating for sustainable practices. And she also has the ability to provide leadership and solutions in complex initiatives, which is the very reason why we have her here today. We're truly honored to have her join us today to take us through the draft bill, help us gain clarity, or help you rather gain clarity on what you may have not understood in relation to the bill, and help us as the BMF and assist us in gauging your input into a well-consolidated BMF submission. We're just waiting for Nonku to join us, and once she does, she'll take over. All right. Thank you For your patience, ladies and gentlemen, our guest presenter has now joined the room. Nongu.
Hi, good morning.
There we go. Okay, Nongu, I've already introduced you, so it's now your turn to take over.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for connecting me and thank you for waiting. And we're ready to go through, and sorry that we are starting late. And yeah, we've got quite a number of people online, about 60, so thank you for joining us. Yeah, so my name is Nongu Hlongwa and I'm from BMF Bloemfontein branch. The organizer of this is Mondin Dlovu. He's a deep thinker and he's our head of advocacy and thought leadership at BMF. I'm assisted here with this webinar by Kopi, Aya, and Sipe. The goal of the presentation is to give you insight to this bill and to get your thoughts as we draft a response from the BMF to the bill. We were reminded by our members the importance of citizen participation, and I'm so happy that there's so many people logged on as we draft a response to the BMF to this bill. And also, it's the first time some of us get to give comments in the public procurement process. We will not get this opportunity for a very, very long time. So what the team and I have done is we read the bill against other legislation. So we know that the bill will repeal or will affect other legislation. We assess the bill against the Constitution and against the empowerment goals of the BMF. We also assessed this against the previous procurement shortcomings, and we did not include any of our political views. This is the layout. This is the outline of the presentation. We had it in mind that there are a variety of participants. We know that we have students, we have our young professionals and our senior members. We try to keep the language, the concepts, and the examples as easy to understand as possible. I believe between ourselves, we could answer some of the more intricate questions that you might have. We've also made time for discussions and allowances and questions. So we will have a discussion after we discuss the Preferential Procurement Act, as well as at the end of the presentation. I'll go over to the next slide. This is a lawmaking process that I thought would make a good start. So Parliament is the national legislature and it's the lawmaking body for South African law. As such, one of the major functions is to pass new laws, to amend existing laws, and to repeal old laws. And we've got houses of Parliament, which are two. So one of them is the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, and they play a role in this process. Most bills come through and are drawn up by the government departments under direction of a minister or a deputy minister. This kind of bill must be approved by cabinet before it gets submitted to Parliament. But we also have bills that are introduced by individual MPs, and these are called private members' bills. An example of a private members' bill was Floyd Shivambu gave a bill to give the state powers to open a bank and not only private companies. That came through as a private bill because it didn't come through from any department of government. We also have certain bills which affect provinces, and they may be introduced in the NCOP, which is the National Council of Provinces. All other bills are introduced in the National Assembly. Once a bill is introduced, the bill is referred to a relevant committee. Unless it's very urgent, the committee could debate the bill, amend it if necessary, and if there's a good public interest, the bill then gets organized through public hearings. Once the committee has decided on its version of the bill, the committee sits on it and it sends it to the House for further debate and a vote. The House also has a right to take the bill and refer it back to the committee for more work before a bill is taken. And then it gets considered that way. So the difference between a bill and an act is that a bill is a proposed law, whilst an act is the law. Before a bill can be an act, it needs to go through the both houses and also still signed by the president before it becomes an act of parliament and therefore the law of the land. So public procurement, which is the bill that we're discussing today, it can be viewed through the South African Constitution. So Section 217 of the Constitution requires public procurement to be done according to a system that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. Further, it says all these systems need to be independent, impartial, transparent, timely, and effective. Something that other countries do not do, that only South Africa does, as a further hallmark of government procurement, is that it's covered under a constitution, and public procurement is employed as a means of addressing discriminatory policies and practices of the previous dispensation. So we go further than looking at price, we go more to issues of fairness and how communities will be affected by how government spends. I will spend more time going through the challenges, and that's purely so that we can know where we come from and what kind of input we could give to the public procurement system. As we give views to the bill, it's important that we take into account the issues that we're currently facing. It's important to note that supply chain management is an important part of procurement in the public sector, and it's how we manage public funds, which is so important. So I will go through what we have as challenges, and the first one that we'll spend time on is the lack of proper knowledge, skills, and capacity. We know that we have good structures. We know that they're adequate and appropriate, but we do not have fully skilled professional supply chain personnel. And this results in failure to properly implement supply chain management. In some government institutions, the quality of the supply chain personnel's skills and ability are well below standard. And we know that supply chain appointments are also influenced by politics and not necessarily by skill. So at our last webinar, somebody was asking, is there any courses still on supply chain? And we know that there are still courses, but for you to become an official in supply chain, we did not currently put that as a requirement, that you should be some kind of practitioner or that you've graduated on supply chain. The next challenge is non-compliance with supply chain policy and regulations. Some of the practices relating to non-compliance with the rules and procedures relate to how the tendency not to utilize a bidding process for quotations and bids, that still happens. The wrong use of the preference point system. Sometimes there's not enough people in bid committees. Sometimes some suppliers are being deemed unqualified with poor reasons, or we pass over bids for incorrect reasons, or we use the wrong procurement process in respect of thresholds. We also see a problem with extensions of validity periods, and this is a period that government has to take to assess a tender. Sometimes we've seen cases where it's gone over a year. There's also the wrong understanding of the laws and how we assess the bills. And how we choose who sits in the bid committee is sometimes not aligned to policy requirements. And when we do sort of deviate from supply chain procedures, sometimes the reasons for deviations are very poor. And this has been highlighted by the AG a number of times. The next challenge is inadequate planning and the linking of demand to the budget. So when you plan in your own home, when you procure, when you buy for your house, you look at how much you have, and you look at what you could buy with what you have. Unfortunately, government does not always work that way. Demand management as a function of supply chain is not always done. So sometimes they overbuy and then resulting in service providers not being paid. Sometimes they underbuy and then results in emergency procurement. So decision-making process for on-demand management is not accurately there, and it doesn't allow departments to procure at the right time, at the right place, and at the right time, at the right cost. So we're still faced with challenges of bad planning and how we link demand to the budget. Some government departments cannot still quantify their needs. They don't know how much services they need. They cannot estimate cost, nor can they track or control or report on the expenditure that they have incurred. The big one that you cannot talk about when you talk about public procurement is accountability, fraud, and corruption. And accountability is central in public procurement as a pillar. Without transparent and accountable systems, resources are channeled through the public procurement system for corrupt acts or for misuse of funds. And we've seen how that has come through over the years. According to the AG, fraud and corruption cost South Africa hundreds of millions of rands each year, and it cannot carry on. And the reason it carries on is because of the next challenge, inadequate monitoring and evaluation of supply chain processes. So monitoring allows you to make decisions, and that gives you the information on how you make policy decisions or you make certain decisions. So we don't always have this information. We're not always sure whether government is doing the right thing or the wrong thing, or if what has been done has achieved the results as intended. So we need stronger strength on monitoring and evaluation. So the reason for wrong or poor monitoring is linked to the absence or poor presence, really, of the control environment. So government departments are placed in a very difficult position to give supply chain the right information or how to implement it. That's why we see a problem with deviations and non-compliance. Sometimes they go undetected until the AG visits or until somebody blows a whistle. So we cannot always have finger on pulse on how procurement is being undertaken. And that's mostly as well because of unethical behavior, which is our next challenge. So ethics is a study of moral judgment, whether we know what's right and what's wrong. And this is important on conduct, deciding on how we act. So ethics and conflict of interest greatly affect supply chain implementation. In some departments, we see that some chief CFOs or chief financial officers wield so much power, and there's also a lack of proper consultations with other senior officials who might have guided things better. We also know that there's too much decentralization in the procurement system. So in South Africa, procurement is done at a local level. It's also done districts and then province and at national level. So how do we look at some of the procurement that they do, for instance, cell phone contracts? How do you make sure, or even banking services, that it's not going through all those, it's too decentralized, leading to maybe not getting the bulk price that government could get, therefore saving us taxpayers money. So there's too much fraud and there's too many cases of tender fraud and lack of services on all levels, because sometimes we don't know who has to procure for what. So if we're building houses, it becomes the duty of human settlements. But what land they build on, it becomes for the municipality to identify the land, and then they still have to go to another water entity and apply for water services. So there's just too much decentralization, and some of that leads to slow service delivery. With the water as an example, what we've done now, what the state has done now with COVID, is that the Department of Water Services under Ms. Lindiwe Sisulu has centralized all the water services And we can see how now the JoJo tanks and water gets to communities faster, because it goes straight from national directly to communities, bypassing districts, municipalities, and provinces. So these are some of we need to decide what goes as a decentralized service and what is key, and what municipalities can still procure on their own. Our last challenge we're discussing is the ineffective use or ineffective BEE policy when it comes to procurement. So South Africa adopted the provision of BEE to empower all historically disadvantaged people, rather than a small group of BEE investors. So in the past, it was just BEE, and then it became broad-based to cover as many of our sectors as possible. And it allowed for expanded opportunities for workers and small enterprises. It went past to ownership and management. And we said, how do we then make sure that BEE goes all the way down to job creation and employment creation? So the current model now still remains too focused on transactions, and it's more involved on assets, which also, when you look at asset-based and how many people have that asset-based and ownership, then there's still a number of few individuals. And then the shortcomings that come up with is that ownership in senior management is been given too much emphasis. And now we see issues of fronting coming up and tender abuse. So what we're asking for is that, can BEE be broader and say, how many jobs are you creating? How many of those jobs are Black? How many industries or local production are you creating? And how much of that is in Black hands? So the current regulation does not incentivize employment creation. It doesn't give adequate support to small business, local procurement, and even local manufacturing of the goods. We are still too skewed in looking at ownership over local production. The other issue that we raised was the current regulations penalize intergovernment working together. For example, if another government entity, an SOE, can offer a service, say Telkom offers a cell phone contract to a province, that is not seen as a BEE deal, even though Telkom is government owned. And if it's government owned, majority of the citizens are Black. So that's another regulation that we wanted to change and to count all SOEs as Black empowered, purely because it represents government as a bigger shareholder and the demographics of the country are skewed towards Black. So we've gone through the challenges, and I'll go through to the next slide. This Preferential Procurement Act is the act that we are currently utilizing in the country for procurement. The act hasn't really changed in the last 17 years. There's been a few versions of it, a few versions of the regulations. I think the last one was 17th of April, 1st of April, 2017. And the reason we keep changing or gets changed is because of how the policy gets applied becomes so inconsistent. And there's a lack of accountability and a lack of support structures. And it just gets too fragmented. There's definitely deficiencies and fragmentation in governance. The interpretation and the implementation of this current act is misunderstood. So we started really changing the procurement procedures in 1995. And these were directed at two broad focus areas, namely the promotion of principles of good governance and the introduction of a system to address our socioeconomic objectives. At that point, there was, the buzzword was a triple bottom line. These reforms were put under the PFMA and the Municipal Financial Management Act. PFMA is a Public Finance Management Act, and that's how provinces and national procure. And then municipal is obvious. So in 2001, Treasury completed sort of like a country assessment review with the World Bank and to assess our procurement practices. And that review identified certain deficiencies. It says there was deficiencies in governance, in interpretation, and in the implementation of this Procurement Act. So that's not a very good outlook if we want to tell international community that we're open for business, that we're looking for investors. So there's what we're using now, it becomes it's not enough to attract people to invest here. And it's also certainly not enough for South Africans to do business with government or trust that government is handling the public purse well. So supply chain management is almost like a guide to accounting officers and in municipalities. That was also done as a guideline. And what that did is that it integrated supply chain management with the management responsibilities and assigned most power to accounting officers, which in a municipality becomes the municipal manager. The principle why this was done was to guide accounting officers to be given more flexibility to manage and ensure that the constitutional requirements of transparency and accountability are adhered to. So before we go through on what the bill is, I don't know, Gopi, do you want to take any questions so far? Or
yes, I definitely do. Thank you for that, Nongu. I've noted the Q&As that have come through so far. I'll attend to that shortly, but I just want to kickstart the Q&A with a question that I have on my side.
Sure.
So the draft bill for me is a good attempt at providing a single and coherent legal framework for South Africa's public procurement system. And what stood out for me as I went through the bill is that an effort was put into stipulating provisions that would strengthen public procurement ethics. The legislation has been in the works to reform and modernize government's procurement and supply chain management systems and policies to eliminate tender-related corruption and simplifying the tender process. So its resurgence after it was stalled for some time, since 2013, is much needed, especially for Black business, and considering where it currently stands. So my question is, so it's important for us to note, though, that there's a persistent feeling among Black entrepreneurs of being ostracized and marginalized from participating and benefiting from the growth and the development of the economy. So to what extent do you think the prioritization of preferential procurement policy addresses this challenge in the bill? And how do you think such a measure can be strengthened?
Thanks, Gopi. I've noted that. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to take more questions?
Let me take more questions from the attendees as well. Okay, so from the Q&A, I'll start with okay, there's Kopano, who is asking, Nongu, currently there is a standard process of reporting on tenders awarded, i.e. the tender description, the value of the tender, the BBE status of co-awarded, and transparency of the directors of the awarded company. So that's Kopano. And then we have, pardon?
That's a question on how far disclosure is done in terms of awarded tenders. Okay.
Yes. And then we have Isai, who's asking, speaking of centralization, was the recent reason by the National Treasury justified in relation to PPEs and other essentials? He's saying he's asking this because National Treasury takes plenty of time before they can respond to any forms of request. And then I'll take one last one from Sibusiso, who's saying, does the bill refer to contract participation goals as a requirement for all government tenders?
Sorry, let me get Sibusiso's question again.
So Spusiso's asking, does the bill refer to contract participation goals as a requirement for all government tenders?
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand it. Do you want to
You're
see?
not sure. Spusiso, can you please just request to speak so that you can elaborate on your question? Okay, we'll just wait for that request. But in the meantime, you can attend to these questions.
Okay, yeah. So your first one on ethics modernizing, it's much needed. So I agree with you on that. And you were also saying, do I feel like there's a prioritization for black companies? We will go into the bill and not skip. To answer you, I would say there's still not enough. And it would be BMF to say there is still not enough. And we will answer that as we go through into the bill.
Okay.
Because others have read the bill, but my feeling and the group's feeling was that there's still not enough. And we need to push through. And I'll show you why in the bill on how the point system is going to work or how even decisions will be made. So we haven't touched on the bill yet. So can we park that until we go through the bill as a group?
That's fine.
Okay. Kopano was asking on awarded tenders. So right now there isn't a requirement for government institutions to say who's been awarded a tender. Right now, departments decide whether they're going to give that list or not. You can go into government websites of different entities and you will see that some of them do not even have that. So it certainly doesn't go or drill down to the level that Kopano was saying that it even shows us directors. It doesn't. It just shows you a list of companies that were awarded and how much their price was. There is no motivation. We know that some departments like Public Works have started and City of Joburg have started a disclosure where even when tenders are being gone through, that members of public can come visit and watch how the process is undertaken. So that will help. So yes, we do not have enough disclosure, and let's maybe Sipho Aya, let's take that as a point on how the bill forces disclosure and transparency. Isai was asking on centralization. There's definitely benefits in centralization. It's quicker, there's economy of scale. We all know what's going on. There's one control. On how the centralization was done with the PPE supplies by Treasury, BMF and many other groups commented and were not happy with that. They essentially outsourced government to a company that was not empowered to do the PE. So we definitely did not support that as the BMF. And that company then, of course, went on to buy from people who potentially look like them and whom they understand. And no, we did not support it. So the issues of centralization, they also we did not forget to merge them with issues of procurement. And we saw the court cases that are coming up on the tourism side, that we are still a country with inequalities. We cannot say because there's a crisis, we ignore the inequalities that exist. And we just perpetuate what's been going on just because there's a crisis. So Isai, to answer you, yes, I support Treasury on centralization. And no, I do not support Treasury. We did not support Treasury because of the way they forgot our empowerment goals and essentially outsourced government to private sector. And the last one was Sbu. Has Sbu requested to speak?
No, Spu has not requested to speak, but I've noticed that even with the other requests that came through for people to speak, as I accept the request, it disappears. So I'll have to sort that out with my team and see what's happening.
Okay. Anything? Do you want to take any more comments before we move on to how do we discuss a bill? Is there anyone else who said anything?
Yes, there is Weakness. Okay. Who's asking, how can this bill exclude politically connected people?
Okay.
I'll take 3 more so that you can move on to the next section. So it's Weakness, and then there's Louis, who's saying he would like to know if there are any plans for relief on triple BEE around learnership and skills training due to the challenges from the COVID-19 virus measures.
Okay.
And then Zenzo is asking, my problem with the Procurement Act is laxed process of mid-contract price adjustments. Does this new bill curb irresponsible price adjustments?
So are those your three?
Those are my three. We'll take the others in the next section, in the next, after the next section of your presentation.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Do you say witness?
Yes, witness.
Okay. Witness, yes. This bill gives us more disclosure. Every tender, you need to disclose who you know, like we normally do on the tenders that we have now. But it drills further down to who's your cousin. Do you even know anybody working in that institution where you're sending a tender? Because we know that currently it was asking to have a family member working, and people will just say no. But we saw the latest case at Eskom with the chairperson with almost like a distant cousin or Mwanawa, Rangwani Wamang, and that wasn't disclosed. The lady felt that the relation was too far-fetched. So yes, the bill sort of forces us now to disclose. And it forces the bid committee to also almost write something on why that disclosure was taken into account and what mitigation was there. For instance, they could come up and say, no, it's a distant relation, or your relation in the department is not even related to this tender, or it's even a separate department altogether. And Louis' question on relief, the bill was written pre-COVID, so there's nothing in what you're asking now, but nothing stops us from putting submissions for a post-COVID world, or how do we deal with crisis now that there's a crisis? Zenzo was saying price adjustments. Price adjustments currently, I agree with you, Zenzo, that just they're used to bring in people who they want to come get the tender. So even though you went in at the right price, they will still find a reason why to procure from somebody else and just make them change prices. So we're not sure why that still happens. And the bill also still allows for price adjustments or negotiations. But we're hoping that with more disclosure, with public participation, or the public being invited to bid assessments, that those kind of factors will be less, or the reasons why it happens will be understood by all of us. Yeah, so we'll go straight into the draft public procurement bill.
Okay, before you do, Nungu, admin has alerted me that they are able to accept requests to speak. So,
okay,
yeah. Could you please accept the requests, guys, so that we can take their questions? Okay, there we go. There's Kopano. Yeah. Okay, it's still not coming through. Okay. To test, yeah, no, there's still an issue with the speak.
Yes.
The speak tab. Okay, we'll try to get that sorted so that we can enable the attendees to speak after the second part of the presentation. So you can proceed.
Okay, sure. So now we're going straight into the draft procurement bill and what we've learned and what are the issues and why there even was a bill. So there are a host of different laws governing procurement, and the primary purpose why the bill came through was to eliminate the fragmentation of the system and have one piece of a nationally acceptable piece of legislation that will help us regulate public procurement. So this also will make it easy for the country, I guess, to do business locally and internationally. The bill will also strengthen governance and compliance. It makes provision for a preferential procurement system that still addresses the imbalances of the past. The bill also provides for an alternative dispute settlement system. At the moment, we don't have a dispute settlement system. If you have any issues, you go straight to court. So this will help how do we manage bills without going to the courts, which is also a costly process for those who do business with government. The bill also regulates deviations from the provisions. So we went through, the bill was proposed, and then the bill, once accepted, it will be the new law, and we've went through the history of how laws are made. The draft procurement bill, a little bit more on it. This is what it aims to do: to define procurement, to give proper measures of integrity on the integrity side. It provides more information right now on infrastructure, on how infrastructure delivery should be undertaken. It goes deeper onto how government sells its assets. And the bill also repeals and amends certain laws that currently exist. Now let me go over to the next slide. We've assessed the bill against the 5 pillars of procurement, and I hope it's clear on your side. The 5 pillars, it's normally 4 pillars in procurement internationally. In South Africa, it's 5, and that's because we have the pillar of equity added in. So the 5 pillars are value for money, open and effective competition, ethics and fair dealing, accountability and reporting, as well as equity. So I'll go through each pillar for you and tell you what we found out on the pillar, with regards to that pillar. Under value, the bill allows for transversal or centralized procurement. And that could only be done according to the bill by National Treasury, or National Treasury has to approve, and Provincial Treasury can facilitate. Transversal contracts occurs when a procuring entity, like say Treasury, procures a commodity in bulk, and the results of that obviously should be that they should be at a discounted rate. They procure in bulk on behalf of multiple departments. We will have an office of the Chief Procurement Officer. At the moment, that office manages close to about 50 transversal contracts on behalf of government. These range from, like you said, surgical gloves, tires, maintenance of government vehicles, courier service, and other services. Also included, again, was these COVID purchases, but we know the government has now decentralized that procurement. Under the pillar of open and effective communication, tenders are currently determined on the basis of a preference point system. So for tenders that are less than 50 million, they're awarded the 80-20 system, where 80% is for price and 20% for BEE. For tenders valued at more than 50 million, it's awarded at a 90-10 principle, in terms of which 90% of points are awarded for price and 10 points for BEE on the scorecard. A big issue for us that we identified in terms of scoring and under open and effective competition is that the draft bill requires that the Minister of Finance determines the preference point system. So unlike the current law, it tells you on the bill, on the current Procurement Act, how preference is given. right now in this bill, all the power lies with the finance minister to still determine. So it's hard for us to know whether it's good for us or not good for us. And it puts too much power to the minister. So, for instance, the minister could decide on a regulation of a 50-50 system. We don't know. What does protect us is that the minister has this wide discretion to determine the preference points on how they will function, but with no real guidance from Parliament. That worries us. And we also know that he or she could easily change a system, although we are protected in terms of regulation, that whatever he or she changes must still go to Parliament for scrutiny. Our issue with on the bill, on how they've left this open to the ministry to decide, is that it could be seen not in line with the Constitution, in that the Constitution says any procurement process needs to be set out in national legislation, and everyone should know what it is. It shouldn't be the sole discretion of a minister. So that's one of the points we've put across, that we're arguing how this new bill fares against the Constitution. It also introduces a new and more streamlined process for open and competitive and effective competition. So that's what we liked, because it's a bit better on how you procure, and especially for public and private partnerships. Whereas in the past, those did not were not clear on how those are governed. Under the pillar of ethics and fair dealing, which was well covered in the bill, we saw an introduction of e-procurement, which gives opportunities to companies to come up with software that the state could use that would match in line with the bill and supply chain processes, and which is a new thing in South Africa, to be able to e-tender, for instance, without all these papers and files that get sent in. Under ethics also, the bill allows now that there should be something called a regulator, and that regulator will have an office within Treasury. So we're happy that there's a regulator. We are worried that the regulator sits within a department that has so much power and control on the procurement system, and we're worried whether the regulator will be impartial. So the job of the regulator will be to defend the Act, and they could also reverse or reconsider decisions on procurement. So if you have a dispute on a tender or how it was awarded, that office will be the office that could overturn a decision. What's also new to cover ethics and fair dealing is that Provincial Treasury now has more teeth. They're able to give more control of procurement functions. They can issue procurement instructions. They can assist client departments or municipalities to build capacity, so that will help a lot. So I think it's going to be now, whoever becomes Treasury MECs, it's going to be a hot ticket under the deployment committees, and this will be looked closely. What's also new in the bill is protection for whistleblowers. So that we didn't have before. So now an official could a whistleblower against a senior staff or CFO and say that this is what's happening on procurement, and they will be protected. Chapter 3 of the bill covered integrity, and it goes all the way down to the conduct of the official, how we deal with conflict of interest, the conduct of bidders and suppliers. Because remember, corruption, for it to happen, it needs both sides. So it gets covered now in the bill, and suppliers need to adhere to that. And then the lady was asking earlier, or Kopan was asking on disclosures. So declarations are also very important, and they're a big part now. And bidders who don't qualify now can be barred from doing or stopped from doing government doing business with government. Chapter 5 of the bill also looked on procurement methods. So there's a variety of more procurement methods. What's new, which Kopano also said, is more information on awarded tenders. Now that process of verifying who the awarding and the verification is now going to hopefully not be delayed, but it has to be sent all the way to National Treasury. So the department needs to give a reason why a tender is being awarded to a certain company. Dispute resolution I spoke about. That's also a new one. So the bill seeks to reduce the litigation costs, I think, that the state goes through at the moment by adding more layers. And these layers are mandatory, or you have to go through them if you want your dispute resolved. So the bill says if you're dissatisfied with an outcome of a tender, you must first ask the relevant state institution or department or municipality to reconsider its decision. If they don't do that, you can apply to the new public procurement regulator to examine and go through that decision. Only once this has been done, you may then, if you're still unhappy, then you can take your dispute all up to the Public Procurement Tribunal, which is a new one that we never had before. The tribunal makes a ruling, and if you're not happy with that ruling, then you can approach the courts for a judicial review. So that's a new one. So if you have a dispute, you need deep pockets. We were not happy in the bill that they're saying if you have a dispute, that dispute management is at your cost. So we were not sure how that will work, and if you're SMME, you'll give up eventually if you had to get lawyers and that to help you, and you're not even at court yet. The bill on fair dealing has a longer process for triple Ps, and it no longer promotes unsolicited bids. So if you have an idea on a PPP and you have the funding, it still has to go out to tender. So we're not sure if that would stop private sector in assisting government on a PPP basis, and if it will stop them giving comprehensive suggestions to some of the problems that the state has. Under the pillar of accountability and reporting, it covered the issue of implementation. So at the moment, the state is allowed to take the implementation, outsource it to a company, and then the company needs to find subcontractors, they need to find local staff, and write a report on how they undertook that exercise. Now, if a company gets given substantial work, which requires subcontractors and requires a local labor, they still also need to follow a tender process on how they are awarded those opportunities, especially on the subcontractor side. So what the bill says is that the implementation of a project by another organization on behalf of the state still needs to be in accordance with the Act. So at the moment, like I said, especially in housing, people get a large number of houses to build, and they have to subcontract a percentage. Then they just choose who gets subcontracted. So now they need to issue tenders, and you need to be a competitive bidding process. This also happens in the CETA programs, where we're not sure how people get contracts to be the ones who are facilitating or doing training programs. So that also now needs to be a tender process. And still accountability and reporting, the bill asks for more coordinated planning, especially on infrastructure projects. I gave the example of building houses. You need so many institutions involved. So now it says the bill promotes coordinated planning. So for houses, it'll be Eskom, water, and housing, and municipality. They have to work together. And also it goes further on infrastructure with delegation of authority. Like I said, when you're building a house, or if a school wants to build a new wing at the school and the Department of Education says, no, the governing body can come up and choose who the contractor will be, the governing body now also needs to issue tenders and follow this procurement process. So there's a bit more work now and a focus on infrastructure, which is a good thing for us. On infrastructure, also they go through more, and there's now an infrastructure delivery management system, which accounting officers need to follow. So they need to keep documents, maintain and implement a procurement system on infrastructure, and write reports. And also they cannot come up with emergency infrastructure. All infrastructure needs to be planned ahead with all these core departments that you might need. If you need an ESCOM, or you need water services, or you need a housing, all of that needs to plan together. And the plan is one plan. It's not a plan at housing, a plan at public works, or a plan at a municipality. Hopefully now we'll have more integration on what the state focuses on, and we won't have projects abandoned all over the place. The bill demands for a feasibility study now, especially on major capital projects, and they go very, very detailed on that, on what a feasibility study should cover. And like I said, the bill also covers disposal of assets. On the disposal of assets, again, there's too much power given to the ministry, and they're saying the minister has to prescribe methods on how assets are disposed. So we're not sure how the empowerment goals will be covered under that. So that's something that we want to see. And again, the issues of how open and transparent this process is come into question, because we would have liked for all of these methods and methodologies to be part of the bill, so we can give a broader and a more thought response to the bill. So we were hoping that an empowerment goal would be a big factor on disposal of assets, and preference will be given to Black companies or Black people. So we're waiting to see how the minister will come up with that. On the last pillar, which is equity, we could not assess this as well as you would have liked, because we were not given the framework, because the bill allows for the finance minister to prescribe a framework. It does, though the bill say that the framework must have a preference point system, and it should talk to the advancement of Black people or in Black companies, along with women, youth, people with disabilities. So we're hoping it'll go further down and maybe give preference to local procurement, especially by Black firms. Under equity as well, and it says under the minister's framework, that now they allow the ministry to come up with set-asides. So set-asides is, for instance, there's a project in an area, maybe the Eastern Cape. The government now is allowed to say that only companies in that area could participate in this tender, or it could even say just only youth companies, or Black youth or Black women. So set-asides are now allowed, which we are very happy with, because I think then we could see improvements in youth-owned, women-owned, or people with disability companies if we could do more set-asides. So so that's under equity. Under equity as well, we saw that the minister has, again, too much power to change the framework. And we found this to contradict the Constitution, which says that it must be part of national legislation. It also says the minister should focus on local manufacturing, township and rural enterprises. As to what end that will be, or if there is even a percentage, we're not sure. We know that Gauteng came up with a percentage of a set-aside for township businesses, which helps, and it now attracted some companies to go invest in the township and go back and create jobs where people live. The bill also, which we are happy with, is that it stops the state from entering into any contract with companies that are not empowered. And we know that the EE Act, the Employment Equity Act, will soon be amended. So this is a big one because non-transport businesses can no longer do a business with government. So we hope we need this, and we know after COVID, jobs and people will be affected. So if we can see more big industry being transformed and allowing and mixing their staff with more Black people, this would help. And maybe even investing in townships so that they can take advantage of opportunities that were set aside for township businesses. So we see a change coming because of this. The bill seems to us to be poised to create more opportunities for Black empowered businesses to grow. It does not spell out exactly what form these measures will take. So we know there'll be set asides. We know that certain contracts could only be for township, youth, or women, or manufacturing businesses, but we still don't know how far that will go. So that's a draft bill as a summary, and we're using the 5 pillars. And then we have the areas of concern that we want to go through that we've picked up. Definitely the first one is the constitutional misalignment. That's a big one. The lack of detail was also a big an issue for us, that it'll be fleshed out later in regulations. We were worried about the separation between politics and administration, especially with this Public Procurement Administrator being under Treasury. We were worried about how impartial would be. We were hoping that instead Parliament would be responsible for appointing in that role. And even if the appointments are done in Parliament and are done in public space, then we all know what measure they were used and why a certain person got the job. And the person in the seat understands that now they're working for the state and they're not working for a certain minister. We saw that people could be barred from doing business with government if they were found guilty of court. We wanted that also stretched. We said companies that were found wanting or not being very ethical by either the competition or consumer commissions should form part of this, instead of just getting penalties or fines, small fines issued and they carry on. They should actually be barred, not just by the courts, but again, competition and consumer commissions. We had an issue with that, with the too much power or reliance to the Treasury Ministry. We're not sure the number of set-asides. And the issue of paying a fee for dispute resolution, maybe dispute resolution for companies of a certain size could be done for free, because not everybody will be able to exercise this right on the dispute side. And also the bill wasn't clear on where infrastructure resides. So right now we know that there's an issue and a continuous fight between public works and client departments on who does the infrastructure work. So these are the issues that we came up with, and we're free to add more. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Nongu. And thank you for taking us through the summary. You mentioned some very pertinent points. Before we get into it, I just want to alert the attendees that the speak tab is not working. So unfortunately, they're unable to speak, but we'll be taking questions from the Q&A. And before we get into that, you mentioned that a lot of power lies with the minister in terms of determining the preference points. And that's also an issue for me, because previously this criteria was made clear. And unless I've missed out on any communication from government, I don't remember government or Treasury giving an explanation as to why, in this case, the preference points are not indicated. There's also an interesting article that I came across by Megan Adderley. She's a partner at Weber Wenzel. And in the article, she's arguing that, like you say now, the draft bill aims to simplify the confusing, fragmented rules and regulate the public tender process into a single unified process, right? But there are still problematic aspects of the draft bill that she's noted, and a big one is that there's a lack of detail on key aspects of the public procurement process, and now they're being left to be fleshed out in later regulations that are going to be promulgated by the Minister of Finance. So for me, I just wanted to know, yes, you've already expressed that it's unconstitutional, but what are your thoughts? What other additional thoughts do you have on this observation? And what do you think could be done to challenge this?
We agree, and there is too much power to the ministry. So this is our choice. It's our time to do something about it. It's our time to say to them, go draft it again. Maybe that's it's a stance that we would take, to say, go draft it again, give us the detail right now, because we are feeling that there's a constitutional misalignment. So give us more detail. So this is our chance now, and we've got till end of the month to submit our thoughts, to submit our opinion.
Absolutely, no. We need this detail, because we cannot have a situation whereby Treasury or government is purporting to be for the empowerment and the development of PDIs and SMEs, but why are you not providing a clear framework that we can follow? Yeah, so that was a big issue for me. And then one last one before I take Q&As from the attendees. SMEs and PDIs, they do have a big part to play in the development of the economy. And the draft bill, which you mentioned, it stipulates these 5 essential pillars of procurement. So yes, the pillars were introduced to stimulate and grow SMEs, but is this enough? I mean, a critical component that is missing from the bill is a credible enforcement strategy. And I'm not sure what others may think of this. I mean, we do not want to find ourselves in a situation where corruption and fraud persists and the state continues to lose billions at the cost of PDIs and SMEs who are not being given opportunities to play a bigger role in the development of the economy. So do you think there's a need for an independent structure of some sort, or government institution to assess the extent to which these pillars are implemented and the implementations of other provisions in the bill overall, to track the progress and effectiveness of the bill?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a good point on an enforcement strategy. That certainly is not there. Or what happens if it doesn't, if these goals are not adhered to. In terms of who looks at enforcement, right now, according to the bill, Treasury is given more teeth, and Provincial Treasury is also given even more power to enforce and account to that. We know that the AG has asked for powers to prosecute. I'm not sure how far that discussion went, but the AG really goes down into the detail and audits the books. Maybe one of the powers we need to give AG is auditing against empowerment goals, which right now do. He just orders according to, I guess, accounting standards and
absolutely. Absolutely, I agree on that one. Okay, let me go to the Q&A. I've noted questions from Stephen, Zenzo, and Bule. So I'll start with Stephen. Stephen or Stefan? Not sure how to pronounce it. Okay. Stephen is saying, I acknowledge the publication of awarded tenders, but it is a battle to get the departments to provide a reason for unsuccessful bids. Okay, that's Stephen's input, which is true. And then Zenzo is asking, it's It's proper contract management. Okay, I think that was a follow-up from a previous question he was asking. So he's saying we have so many instances where government pays the full price, invoices for goods or services never received or poorly performed. Does the new bill provide clarity on that? So that's Zenzo. And then we have Pule, who's asking, what are the key policy prescripts the bill wishes to suggest to departments that are underperforming regarding the SCM ecosystem? Did you get that one, Nungu? It's Pule, who's asking, what are the key policy prescripts the bill wishes to suggest to departments that are underperforming regarding the SCM ecosystem? Okay, and another flagged question is from, okay, Kopano, which is why Kopano needed to speak, because this one is quite a mouthful. Okay. She's asking two questions. First, as an extension to my question, do you remember the first question she asked?
Kopano, yes, on ethics and modernizing.
Yes. So now she's saying...
It was disclosure, sorry. Yeah.
So she's saying, as an extension to that question, can the bill provide for a centralized and standardized way of reporting on one platform like CSD on tenders, so that at any point the public and the government can have a view of how well or not the public procurement is managed? She says she thinks the company name, the value of the tender, and directors' BBBE status should also be included in the report, which I agree on. I would even say it needs to report on the main company and its primary subcontractors. So that's the first question, which is also some substantial input as well. Secondly, she's asking, in relation to the township economy or localization, can the bill make provision to say, for example, they are procuring for Soweto and try and use at least 33% of supplies from that area where possible? Yeah. This will encourage small businesses in township to build their capacity and qualify for such tenders where there are currently gaps. On the number 3, all right. According to you, Nongu, how does the bill address the corruption and fraud issue? And if not adequately addressed, what suggestion do you have?
Okay. And all these are from Kopano, even fraud and corruption?
Yes, these 3 are from Kopano, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I answer these before we move on?
Can we answer these and then we'll move on to the next questions?
Yeah. So Pula was asking on underperforming. No, it's not there. The bill does not address how the state will tackle underperforming by accounting officers or institutions. But we are covered in that Treasury can come in and take over, whereas currently Treasury cannot. They're waiting for AG or something big to happen, and they have to jump through hoops, and it has to be almost like an EXCO decision on taking over. So the bill now gives Treasury functions and ability to go in and assist institutions that are not doing so well. We're hoping Treasury will be the monitoring arm because they hold the purse. And also the issue of whistleblowing. Now that there's protection for civil servants to whistleblow, we are hoping that will deter or will help Treasury step in sooner than after the fact, after corruption has been done. Kopano had 3 questions. We didn't touch on Stephen's question, Kopi.
Did I not?
I think he was asking on reporting, and I asked what.
Can you go back?
We have an abbreviation, but while you look for that.
Oh no, Stephen you were saying that. Pardon?
I'll let you speak.
Stephen was saying that he acknowledges the publication of awarded tenders, but it is a battle to get the departments to provide reason for unsuccessful bids.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's true. That's still not there. And it ties in nicely to what Kopano was saying, to say maybe centralized reporting on a platform such as maybe CSD. So that'll be large and they'll be very hard to put together. But it's a good suggestion, Kopi. Maybe there's something we should put forward, especially on disclosure and ethics and
Absolutely,
and communication. Maybe there's something. Thank you, Kopano, for the suggestion. Set asides, you were saying, you made an example of maybe a project in Soweto. So set asides are allowed now under the new bill. In the last bill, that was seen as almost corrupt or wrong. We know we had the big example at SAA where 93% of SAA spend goes to companies that were not empowered. And the infamous chairperson at the time was saying no more. And she was taken to task with that because she was not falling. There was no legislation that backed her up. So they explained that they're buying parts and things like that for airlines, and those companies are mostly international and would not do BE. So we were not, and she had no legislation to back her up on that one. So right now that there's set asides, and there'll be more teeth now for institutions to come up with set asides or reject doing business with certain companies because they're not empowered. Corruption and fraud, I think it's well covered on that, and you can see the state wants to do more to avoid it. It's just, do we have enough enforcement on it? And I'm not sure if enforcement should sit here or should be sitting at NPA. But it makes it very illegal, and it goes through on especially issues of disclosure and saying whether you know anyone. And it is not only as one-sided, as we're saying government is corrupt. For government to be corrupt, it needs private sector to be corrupt. So now the bill covers those and says, what is the conduct of us in the private space when we engage with government? Yeah. Do you want to take more or take more comments?
Can I just, are you able to take 2 more questions?
Yeah, of course. You still have time, eh?
Okay, yes, we still have time. So we've got Pule, who's asking, how does the bill plan to address the deepening legislative disintegrations? BSC and BEC are not clear on their mandates that often lead to tender cancellation. And what about the manipulative power from ministers who often influence the outcome? Is the bill demanding some level of accountability for any interference caused? This is similar to what Stephen was asking. And then there's Pule again. So Pule has 3 questions.
Okay.
So did you get the first one?
Yes. I got it.
Okay, the second one. What is the bill saying regarding an excessive predatory pricing by big corporations to deliberately outsmart SMMEs from competing?
Yeah, it's a good point.
And then his last question is, which is more of an input, although the electronic submission is necessary, that does not in any form, shape, or lessen fraud activities by smart, corrupt officials. Has the bill gone in as far as enforcing the end-to-end transparency process from when a submission is made?
Okay, so he's talking about e-tendering, eh?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Pule.
Witness, I've noted your question. Sorry, Nonku. He's asking about written submissions to the BMF and the deadline. I'll indicate that at the end of the session.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pule. The bill, instead of the current procurement, where the onus on being transparent and fair sits with officials, the bill goes on now and ties in senior politicians, especially when there's talking on the issues of whistleblowing. They do say that the official concerned who's feeling pressure from either a premier or a minister is allowed to raise up their hands and force the minister to give those what they call mandates as a written instruction, and failure for a politician to give that, the official has a right to say, this is what he or she asked me to do, and I felt uncomfortable, and I felt that it's against the rules. So that is there. Whereas before, politicians could just hide behind, well, I'm not an accounting officer. Right now, they're fully tied into this, and that hopefully helps with the manipulation. In terms of the committees and the assessment committees, again, we lack people with skills or who have studied supply chain to make up part of these committees. So that's still an issue that the bill does not address. So it's still the discretion of an accounting officer who they choose to be part of those committees. So that gap still exists. On predatory pricing, it definitely doesn't cover anything on that. Hopefully when those sort of things happen, like they happened with the stadiums, then we can bar those companies from doing business with government because they were found wanting on the competition board side. But the bill does not take into account what Competition Commission as a finding. It does not consider that. It only considers findings of a court. So as a BMF, we ask for more, to say findings from competition and consumer councils are binding, and the state needs to consider them before they do business with an entity. On e-tendering, we're still not sure how it's going to be done. We just know the government is looking at e-processes and automated procurement. We're not sure how that will be done.
Okay. Okay, so that's all the questions that I've received, and that, unless you have any additional comments that you'd like to make, but it brings us to the end of our session today.
Okay, no, nothing else. I'm happy we had this, and we had quite a number of people participating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Kopi, you'll tell us how you're accepting proposals or answers from the BMF members.
Yes. Okay. So proposals and additional input is welcome. You can send it to my email address, gopi@bmfonline.co.za. The presentation has also been made available for the attendees. If you just click on the Files tab, you'll be able to access the presentation. And in terms of deadline, the submission to Treasury has been extended to end of June. So it would be great to receive input from members by the end of this month, all right? To give the office more time to put together a consolidated submission. So Nungu, thank you so much for taking us through this presentation. Very insightful, and it's also alerted myself and my team of additional aspects that we need to take note of when putting together the submission, especially when it comes to the loopholes that are found in the bill that we cannot ignore and that need to be addressed. So members, your input in the session has been noted, together with the input from the first workshop. And like I said, it's going to be consolidated into a final BMF submission on the draft bill. Nungu, thank you once again for availing yourself.
Sure.
And yes, and really taking time to take us many steps forward in terms of preparing for solid submission. Thank you, participants, for joining us. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. My email address, again, is gopi@bmfonline.co.za. It's been a pleasure facilitating the session. Keep safe and stay productive, and may you have a lovely day further. Goodbye, everyone.
Kopi, sorry, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, Monde. It's
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. No, thank you very much, colleagues. There's a question I think you missed there from Tabo. If you go back down, there's a question from Tabo that was, I think, missed.
Oh, Tabo. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So Nonku, Tabo is asking, how do we ensure that we guard against unintentional challenges posed by prior acts, where we find that products and services become more expensive due to the so-called middleman structure adopted by partnerships, price advantages for big players, of which Triple PFA advocated?
Okay, no, the bill does not go into that detail. The bill does say, even if you go into partnerships or even if you go into sort of like a middleman structure, which most Black businesses start as, it doesn't prohibit it as long as what they're supplying is at the right price and it's the right product, and there is no corruption in between. So I wouldn't be saying the government must go directly at source, because some companies start off in the way of providing services or being middlemen in facilitating for the state, and then they grow from then on, because not all businesses are at source. Copy? Copy, is still there?
Okay, my mic was off. Sorry about that. Monde, is that it?
Yeah, it looks like it. I see another comment from Refilwe. Did you see it?
Okay, yes, I see it. All right. Refilwe is asking, is there an alignment from the proposed bill with the IDP and NDP and the standard charts of accounts? I don't remember seeing that. No, there isn't. Yeah. Okay. All right, then that marks the end of our session. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.